Today on the Hub at Path podcast.
We're going to do something called a work pays calculator, where we're going to be able to provide some real intel on what happens to people's benefits when they go to work so that they can have that conversation.
Right.
Since I've been here, whether I talk to a government official or anybody else, everybody has a different opinion on what happens to certain benefits when you go to work.
Welcome, everybody, to the Hub at Path podcast, where we discuss tips, tricks, and best practices for employment professionals in the employment services sector. My name is Kevin, and I am joined today by the president of Fedcap Canada, Grant Collins. In this interview, we discuss employment services in various locations and what may be in store for us here in Ontario, both short-term and long-term. Thank you for your time and attention, and enjoy. Thank you for joining me.
Absolutely great to be here.
So, I think this is a good chance that, I imagine a lot of the frontline staff maybe don't know you very well, and maybe you want to start off by introducing yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are, your background, and what got you into employment services.
Okay. So I am now the president of Fedcap Canada. I'm also the president of 4 or 5 other Fedcap companies. And I'm the senior vice president of the workforce development practice area for Fedcap. Fedcap has 4 practice areas. Employment services obviously fits in workforce. And we are the portion of the organization that has gone outside of the United States into Canada, into the Scotland, and into the UK, and perhaps some other places along the line. What got me started is an interesting question. I used to sell material back in the day that it was called Motivating the Unemployed. They were binders, curriculum, and visual aids and videotapes to states in the United States for a period of time. And then one day, that company I worked for got a new contract in an urban area, and they said I had to actually go and deliver the equivalent of what we call POP, the work readiness workshop.
Right.
And not only was I mortified, I actually was not a believer in it. I felt fine selling the material, but then having to go deliver it, I'm like, no. I really, truly am a convert from someone who was amazingly skeptical. I just didn't believe that people needed those skills. I didn't believe they didn't have them. I've never suffered for lack of confidence, so I just did not know. I went reluctantly, very reluctantly went. I did my first workshop on the counter of my kitchen with 14 glasses and a salt and pepper shaker. Right. I set them up in a U shape on the table, and I gave them all personalities, and I had to separate a couple of them because they didn't like each other. Right. And I did the 5-day workshop with a mirror and a clock and the agenda.
Wow. Right
there in my kitchen. So when I did the first one, it actually worked.
Right.
So I really, really was a convert. I didn't see it coming, and I've been doing it ever since. This is my passion.
Wow.
I'm sure we'll talk about it later, but I've been since Fedcap since 2013. I think we're somewhere around 120,000 people into work.
Right.
I celebrate it daily. People going into work is my currency. It gives me energy. It's where I get my joy from. So it's quite a ways from where I started.
Wow. And, it's really interesting that you say that, because I think that's kind of a theme across the network. And I have to admit, when Fedcap first came in and the Power of Possible came, I was like, what is this?
Yes.
Ooh. But one of the things that I've noticed is when I always go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and if there a lot of the needs that people have are kind of being injected into people, like for instance the physiological needs, or the sense of safety and security and sense of belonging and all that sort of stuff. But the one thing that I found was kind of missing in all that was that sense of self-esteem.
Yes.
And I felt like the Power of Possible workshop started to actually inject that into people, and in a really good way. And people, once they started to get that kind of internal motivation, intrinsic motivation, that they started to be more open to job search and everything.
Yeah, it really happened like that right in front of my eyes. I didn't know if I had a lot to offer. I wasn't middle-aged. I hadn't taken 4 or 5 jobs. I didn't know the intricacies of all of that.
Right.
What I saw, though, was people from day 1 to day 5 blossom and become more vocal and felt differently about their way forward than they did before. And that really all I needed to do is what the book told me to do, and it really released it.
Wow.
So the big thing for me that I see, and the reason why I thought it was really important to try something like that here was, it's one thing to have a system and it serve people. What I didn't want to create, or certainly wanted to protect against, was just another layer of dependency. So it goes from one worker to another worker, from a social assistance worker to a different worker. That really, somewhere along the line, what we need to do is recognize that people have these qualities within them.
Yeah.
And then how do we set the systems up so that we can extract it? We're not putting anything in anybody. What we're doing is we're uncovering things that they already have. That was the revelation that got me hooked. That when I was teaching it, I wasn't really, all I was doing was facilitating. And I'm pulling out what was already in the person. Really not putting anything in, showing people in some ways different words to describe their reality, but they had to live up to it. And watching them make that transition over and over. I can't really beat it. Whether it's the POP workshop itself or employment services transformation, I view all of it as really the same opportunity to change the focus for the individuals that we work with. And even as much as the way Fedcap works with providers is it's the same philosophy. I'm here to support frontline. All of our tools are built for you.
Yeah.
We want it to happen right there. That's the most important thing to us.
Yeah. Yeah. I've always found that motivation is so incredibly important. And you're absolutely right that it needs to be motivation that something they actually care about, as opposed to something we, want to put on them, for sure. So, many of the listeners, you might not know this, but Grant was the one who originally came up with what was originally called the Supported Employment Service and is now called the Hub at Path. I'm really curious, what gave you the idea of having this kind of centralized professional development consultation model in employment services? So, as you know, the employment transformation combined a whole bunch of different contract types, OEAS, the ODSP, and the EO. Yeah.
The EO group was the largest in volume and size, but it was the least ready, in my opinion, to deal with individuals that were amongst our inclusion groups, namely social assistance recipients as well as individuals with disabilities.
Yeah.
So the thought was, how can we get what I think is the largest, widest door of the network to be a place where a person with disabilities could go and actually get good service.
Right.
So I didn't want to take individuals from that door and send them to another door.
Right.
That just seemed like a burden.
Yeah.
So what I thought would be more beneficial and useful is, how do we open that door wider for a larger group of individuals to have as good of an experience as they would if they walked into a specialist's location. And that became the impetus behind creating more capacity again for that frontline worker who is traditional employment services, not necessarily built for specialized groups or inclusion groups. But how can we actually get them the resources, built around them so that door can actually be a real one for far more job seekers than perhaps in the past. Because this is the opportunity that we have under employment services transformation. We can reimagine all of that to whatever level we think makes sense. So that really was the thought behind it, and it's been in all respects an overwhelming success. I think thanks to you and to Path and everybody who's participated in the development of it, the upkeep of it, and the continual evolution of it. As you know, we started with a pilot in the Hamilton area, then we expanded. Yeah. And I suspect this model will go beyond even our catchment areas, which I'm very enthusiastic about. I think it's the right way to go. Yeah. But it keeps all of those principles in place that matter even with the job seeker, in my opinion. The ownership needs to be local. It needs to be urgent. We need to learn by doing. We need to lifelong learn. And we need to reward ourselves and or have some way of recognizing how well we're doing along the way. Have some fun with it. Right? Yeah. All of that is built in, and I think that Path is well suited to be able to take this well beyond what we intended in the beginning. Yeah, yeah. You know, it's whenever a client enters a service provider, I always think that there's a reason why they're going to that particular one, right? Whether it be YMCA, maybe they're a member of the gym there, or maybe College Boreal, maybe they, had some sort of connection with the college, right? And I think that it's really important that they be able to access services and have that kind of one-stop shop philosophy, but access all services, right? Not just the if a service provider does have, like, I love the idea of kind of widening that door to allow space for anybody. That's incredible. So you were kind of mentioning about potentially implementing something like this program elsewhere. Is that something that you've been giving a lot of thought to? Yes. We're in a, I wouldn't say a huge, but we're in a growth mode. So there's other places in Canada as well as in the United States where we are exploring. One we just started in Tennessee, for example. It's going to look very much like what we do here. Great. And I see the same sort of opportunity to build the skills of the front line, open the door wider for those who are coming in. The interesting thing about that group in Tennessee is that to qualify for the program, you have to be what they call an economic absentee. How that differs from Canada is you've got walk-ins and you've got referrals from social assistance. Right. Well, there, you cannot have been looking for a job for probably more than 60 days. So you wouldn't walk in. Right. And you can't be on any government assistance. Oh, really? So we're literally having to go find people who are outside of the labor market altogether to get them to come in. And we're using some of the same tools that we would use here in Canada. So I'm kind of excited about it. That sounds really interesting. Yeah. Wow. Okay. So you've led Fedcap's efforts in more than just Canada, as was previously mentioned. Since 2013, you expanded to locations across the U.S., UK. I had down here that you helped 90,000. You said 120 now? 120 is more like it. Wonderful. 120 people find sustainable employment, and I want to learn more about what happened in these other countries. Are there a lot of similarities between rolling out Fedcap programs in the US, UK, and Ontario? And yeah, it's interesting. It's all employment services, and we all speak the same language. We spell things differently, though. Right. It's vastly different, actually. It's vastly different. Vastly different. The North American sort of framework for employment services is more similar because it's North American than going to Europe. Even though Canada and the UK have a relationship, the employer behavior in the U.S. and Canada is much more similar
Right.
than employer behavior of either of those in the UK.
Oh,
It's
okay.
very, very different.
Huh.
So the ways in which people are readied for employment are different, extremely different, depending on the contract and or the place. I'll give you a couple of examples. We have a program in the United States where all we do is get people industry recognized credentials. We don't put them into work. The deliverable is that you started this course and you ended it and you got an industry recognized credential. That's what the government wants us to do. They then send them off to another place for the traditional employment readiness, but they want everybody to start with that credential because they have a notion that it's going to increase their job entry wages. Right. Now, I think there might be some truth to that. We don't know because we don't ever see the job placement end of it.
Right.
They do that somewhere else. I'm a little concerned about all the movement in that, right? I like the person, as you said earlier, to be in a place, and let's bring the services around them.
Yeah.
So it's a different model in there and with that government. We do a lot of work behind the wall in prisons.
Okay. Yeah.
And in detention centers.
Mm-hmm.
So that teaching is different, obviously. We're beginning to use virtual reality to help with people understanding specific occupations and actually getting some training in that occupation, because instead of having to handle all of that stuff, you can put it in the goggles, as I call it, and they can get familiarized with it. So when they come out, they connect to in-community program like ours, and then we get them a job, right, and build the supports around them just like we do here in Canada. So it depends on the customer, and it does depend on the country, but I would say that the provision is, in some cases, dramatically different. So you'd think there'd be more things in common about it. When I say different, I mean the tactics, the things that you actually do to help a person. Mm-hmm. The sequences are different. The philosophies are different. It's all over the place. I have to try to keep it sorted in my mind because there's some wins that can come from combining some of those things. So I do have to keep tabs of it. I just recently did what did I call that thing? It was kind of an assessment. I put all of our programs down the left-hand column and across the top, all of the components that they had. And you could see the ones that were similar and the ones that were unique across the board. And I'm doing that because I feel like we can get each other to talk. If we can talk to each other, we might be able to add a couple of pieces to it. I'll give you just one more example. Mm-hmm. In the United States, many of you probably know that we've been doing workfare since like 1996. It's just a part of how social assistance works in the U.S. Mm-hmm. If you come in and you need a welfare check or a social assistance grant or whatever you want to call it, mm-hmm. in the United States, in exchange, you have to do something to essentially work that off. We use workfare as one of the ways to do it. Work experience or community service is kind of how we do that. In a new extension for our UK operations, they're going to introduce workfare.
Interesting.
So they used to do it, 20, 30 years ago. They got rid of it, didn't do it anymore, but now they're coming back around. So we've got a lot of U.S. sort of background and history on how to do it well. Mm-hmm. I think people who didn't like workfare had a reason not to like it. Mm-hmm. We do it in a different sort of way. So you still do your positions of interest, mm-hmm. as we do here. We will get you a site that fits one of your top 3 job choices.
Right.
If you have some sort of a limitation or a disability, you work within it. You will never be asked to work without it, outside of it. And we put those protections in place. Right. And you do it only for 90 days, and then we reevaluate to see if you're ready to go into employment or if you're ready to do some other thing. Mm-hmm. So it's not go pick up trash in the parks assignment that's indefinite.
Right.
It's very limited and it's very targeted to what it is that you want. That's what we're going to try to bring over to the UK. There's probably 30 different job titles in our sort of model of that. And we'll the UK will pick up on that and they will borrow from it to some degree. But that's what having all of these programs and contracts allows us to do, is to figure out how can we enhance the other ones with things that we're already doing and vice versa.
Right. That workfare, that's a really interesting concept. My immediate gut reaction is like, ooh,
Yeah.
But at the same time, I can see how that could be beneficial for people. I could see how having people go into essentially work, and again, I always look at that self-esteem. That self-esteem
right.
is consistently missing.
That's right.
From a lot of programs, and I think it's really neat to have a program that actually kind of focuses in on that a little bit more. I used to run a pre-apprenticeship program that was very similar to what you were describing earlier, where our goal was to get the person the level 1 credential, and then beyond that though, so we kind of connected a literacy basic skills program as well as a pre-apprenticeship program as well as employment services, all kind of nested in one area, and it was an amazing success to see. The people kind of moving from those $15, $16 an hour jobs into probably making more than I am, 35, 40 plus, doing a trade, and that
Right.
was just incredible.
Right.
I think there's a lot to be said for those sort of education like Better Jobs Ontario is another kind of example of an education intervention that absolutely changes people's lives.
Right.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, collectively, overall, there were two employment models or activities that showed efficacy in all of the research that I've done. One is job readiness, or POP. When you looked at people who went to work and you asked the question, what was in their path before they went to work? What did that delivery system look like? 72% of them had POP in their path. 52% had work experience in their path.
Oh, wow.
So it actually, if done right, was a very good activity for folks to be able to, all of the things that you said, build a habit of going to work, working with other people, working all of that out in a safe environment. Some folks were incarcerated. Others, for whatever reason, had huge gaps in their work history. And the workfare episode, 2 or 3 of them, got them 2 or 3 references of people.
Well, and that's what I was thinking with the workfare is that,
Exactly.
you could potentially get references.
That's right.
And I imagine occasionally it's people who are working in those positions as volunteers would get taken on by the employer.
That happens too. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not the political environment. The word creates all kinds of emotions for people, but there's a way to do it where it is very edifying and it helps the person. And so that's the one that we're trying to export to the UK.
That's great. So we're kind of curious, having done this a number of times and run different types of programs in different places, what do you see happening in Ontario over the next, let's say, few years?
So if anybody from the ministry is listening, I think these contracts should go at least 10 years.
Right.
Okay. and I say that for a couple of reasons.
I think it's a good idea.
One of the main reasons, though, is when I look at the data, it takes about 24 plus months to get the full number of people into work from a particular contract year.
Right.
So it's not over after 12 months. There's
Yeah.
another 12 to 24 months that it takes to get the person in. I haven't even started retention yet.
Yeah.
Right? So
Yeah.
there's the other story is then, okay, once they get in, it's going to take another year at least. There's 4 years.
Yeah.
So I'm joking a little bit, but not really, because if you think about phase 3 and all those providers that are going to start, what will be in a prototype's 5th year, you need to give it enough time to know if whether or not it's working, right? And it takes much longer than I think anybody thought. But to the credit of the network, and to the credit of social assistance, and to the credit of the participants from social assistance, people who have been in the program for more than 12 months are still entering work in the 13th, 14th, and 15th month for the first time. And that's a major change from the previous version of this, where I think there was a bit of urgency around hitting an annual target.
Right.
Well, Employment Services Transformation gave us the opportunity to tell people, we'll get there when we get there. You don't have to be in a hurry.
Yeah.
So I actually like that. It really does mean all of this is going to take longer. Because phase 3 hasn't started.
Right.
Essentially, most of Ontario is still in the early stages. Right? So the real leaps forward in terms of evolution and innovation are, I would say, really the work of the prototypes.
Yeah.
And that we've got some things in mind, but it's probably going to stay really visible for the prototypes more than others. I think there's more to be done with employers, for example. I think there's more capacity building that can happen in a more organized way with frontline staff. We're going to do something called a work pays calculator, where we're going to be able to provide case managers or advisors some real intel on what happens to people's benefits when they go to work, so that they can have that conversation.
Right.
Since I've been here, whether I talk to a government official or anybody else, everybody has a different opinion on what happens to certain benefits when you go to work.
Right.
And that there's the sort of rumor was that there's some benefits that would keep a person only working 20 hours, because if they worked more than that, they'd lose a benefit for their kid.
Oh, yeah, like clawbacks. And,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, that's no good. I mean, you wouldn't want a person to work 20 if they could work 40, right?
Yeah.
So why don't we figure out what the actual policies are behind it, so that when a person's coming in and they're thinking about a job and they're thinking about a certain wage, we can actually calculate what it would do, plus or minus, with taxes and everything else, to see if in fact they're actually better off. I know that the ministry disregards a certain amount of earnings, and so all of that would be put into this calculation. We think that'll be a useful tool. But we're going to be continuing to focus on the front line, essentially, in building their capacity and strengthening them. I don't believe this is going to be the last transformation that will ever happen. Our goal and our vision was that we'll leave it better than we found it, and that the folks who do the work in the local areas and the local offices will have some skills that perhaps they didn't have before. And if we accomplish that, I'll be happy. We're doing quite well, so I feel like it was the right approach to take.
One of the things that I absolutely love about the transformation that happened, and I know I might get some hate for this, but the focus on retention has been one of the best things to come out of the whole retention. Now, I don't know about the pay stubs and all that sort of stuff, but actually following people and connecting with them and ensuring that they're employed, and if they're not employed, getting them back in, and having a year post job entry, we used to call job entries exits.
Yes.
Right. So a year post job entry
Right.
that we are really taking care of them, I find. Now there's certainly a lot of administrative work behind that.
Yes.
But yeah, no, it's been one of the best things I think to happen.
Well, it's good to hear that we've been doing that for some time, both in the UK and in the US.
Yeah.
Each has a different system for it.
Yeah.
I think Canadians have a certain sensibility when it comes to personal data
Yep.
that in some ways lends more to the pay stub gathering exercise.
Right.
In the US and Canada, we get that information through third parties.
Right.
And, I don't think we're ready for that quite yet here.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea of having a support and or someone you can reach out to that you can bring to your job essentially as a support, or even talking to an employer where if I am essentially saying to an employer, listen, I don't know what you get with so-and-so, but here's what you get with anybody who comes from our network, right?
Yeah.
We're going to be with them for 12 months afterwards. They're still going to be eligible for all the things that they need. So any issues or concerns, we'll be more likely to take care of that.
Mm-hmm.
Those are all good things, and
Mm-hmm.
I think we'll start to leverage that more. But to your point, that is sort of the next frontier, I think, that will happen. And this is, again, why I think it takes 10 years. We're in year 5.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to start moving more and more into what I call precision, and that is really more precision, right people, right outcomes. And the outcomes part is how well are we doing with people keeping jobs for 365 days?
Right.
And I'm going to throw something out that's a bit controversial. I don't mean for it to be, but I hope everybody who's listening can understand this. For me, it's less about keeping the job at 365 days, but more about still being employed. You might be at another place. You might be at your second or third place. That's okay.
Oh, yeah.
That's okay. So we ought not try to lock people into something when they've gotten everything out of it that they could get.
Yeah.
But as a network or a system or employment services in general, here's not a conversation you hear often. So, Kevin, you think it might be time for you to move to another employer? We never say that.
Right.
But it actually might be the right moment for them to go get more pay, get more growth, get more professional development opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a frontier that I believe we're going to get to tackle at some point, but we're not there yet as a system.
Yeah.
But what we're trying to do is keep people moving forward. And I don't always think that means locking them into 365 days at the same employer.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I really encourage, particularly for those clients that are either unmotivated or undermotivated, is to do it's called a gap analysis,
Mm-hmm.
where you think, okay, you're here now and you want to be over here. Maybe over here is a veterinary technician or what have you, and you can't just jump there, right? It
Right.
takes time and training and all that sort of stuff. And so, but what are the steps that are necessary for you to get there? And one of those steps inevitably is employment, so that you can save money to go to school, so that you can then, do the sort of thing that you want to do. But I truly believe that in doing that, you're going to have retail. Retail is the type of job that just picks away at you.
Yes.
I've done it.
Yes.
And but if you're in that job and you know the reason you're in that job, and there's a light at the end of the tunnel where you're intending on going to school and going to do something else, there's a better chance that and to your credit, there's a better chance that you will stay employed, not necessarily in that job, but employed, and kind of contributing and all that sort of stuff, rather than just kind of getting that job just so that you can get the job entry and then you're happy.
Right.
I think that you'll find a lot of allies on that.
Right.
on that
If
front.
you think of systems, right? you'll see some of us are probably more ready only because we've been at it for 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
The others aren't there yet. They're still trying to understand what the Common Assessment is doing with Stream C's and Stream B. Like, what is that?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So they'll be going through that for 18 months to 24 months. And then they'll figure out, oh, wow, it takes another 24 months after the year starts for my people to get jobs. So they're going to go through all of that before there's this overall sense of conversation around, so really, should they stay for the whole time? Or how do we upskill them? Are there things that we can do while they're in work to prepare them for the next job?
Right.
Now, I think that's what we should be talking about, but we're not there yet, right?
Yeah.
We're not there yet.
Yeah. That's great. So, one of the things that I've noticed in like pre-transformation compared to what's happening now is we used to be fairly competitive and kind of disjointed, working in silos a lot of the time. And I would argue in a not so good way. I've noticed since the transformation happened that the network has become more cooperative and more collaborative. Have you found that to be the case in the network, and what do you think may have caused this?
So absolutely, I have I've seen it. The interesting thing was pre-EST, I'd only been sort of in the area, I'd say a year before transformation started. And then I had the opportunity to go and visit across the Hamilton Niagara catchment area and talk to different provider organizations. And even in doing the data for, what is this network going to be able to produce under EST, it was all over the map in terms of, well, this organization sees mostly Stream A's and they hit their target. This one seems mostly someone else and they don't hit their target, but they're actually doing more of the work that we think is going to happen under EST. This group has people who go to work, but they go to work 5 hours a week. This one is 20 hours a week. So there's this natural tension between what all looks to be on one scorecard. Everyone's underneath it going, well, we do this. They do that. Right.
Yeah.
And so that was real.
Yep.
And then one of the things that we did was we put everybody on what I call on the same board.
Yeah.
We basically said, look, here's your region. Here's your total.
Yeah.
Here's your piece.
Yeah.
Okay. I liken it to golf. I'm not a golfer, but we've all seen the ads on TV where they pit one golfer against another golfer. Like it's about these golfers. No.
Right.
Both of them have to put the ball in the hole. They don't compete against each other. They compete against the course. So what I've always said to folks is, listen, we just need you to do your part.
Yeah.
Do your part to the best of your ability. They'll do their part to the best of our ability. Whether you're half that number or they're twice that number, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
We all need you to do your piece.
Yeah.
So to me, I'm hoping that some of that helped to change some of the competitiveness around it. Originally we had created incentives so that if you met as a contract your targets, you got a certain amount. If the region that you're in met it, you got more.
Right,
and if the overall met it, then you would get more.
Right.
We didn't get all the social assistance referrals we thought we would get, so we couldn't really put that in place. But we were very transparent around showing everybody, here are your targets.
Right.
Here's your neighbor's targets.
Yeah.
And let's find a way to focus on yours, get it to be the best you can possibly be. Yeah. And, let's see where we are at the end of that. And I think that worked out.
Yeah. That's great. So I have a great love for employment services because I feel that once government and its citizens are aligned in terms of the economy, we are helping people not only at the individual level looking for work, but also kind of on an economic level, because those people who were previously in receipt of some sort of social assistance are now employed and paying taxes, but they're also employed and getting more money, which allows them to, benefit themselves and everything. So I'm curious, what do you feel the impact has been on both that kind of micro level, the individual, but also in terms of the macro, the economy and everything for the transformation?
It's a great question. I'll start with the micro, obviously. I think it is tremendously important that we have services and systems that build individual people up so that they can go and, actualize themselves in employment at the level that they want to, or get in if they're not in, whatever that dynamic is. That's hugely important. It inevitably will have an impact on the larger economy, particularly social assistance. And to the extent that we can focus on that group, we're going to realize the largest amount of essentially transformation.
Right.
Because, I want people to be inspired by their work to continue to work afterwards. So we do this in a particular way because I don't want you coming back every time you're using a job. I mean, you can.
Yeah.
Of course you can.
Yeah.
But the idea is to get you ready so that once you go in, that you can sustain. Again, I do think that was the right idea behind this model, to put the retention in there, right? To say, look, it's more about the initial transactional episode. What can you do long term?
Yeah.
I think that's huge. So we're going to be focusing more and more on that as we move forward, because we're at that stage where we can do that. So interestingly enough, in Tennessee, I think the governor and the commissioner have it right, and I have the same thought process for here in employment services transformation in our catchment area. It's how can we use the referrals and people that we have to be an economic engine for that geography.
Right.
So what that sounds like is this. Instead of having a collection of providers who are helping people get jobs, how can City Hall, economic development, the chambers of commerce see us as a ready supply of workers,
right,
so that they can attract business here.
Right.
So because they know that some portion of that workforce will be put together by the network, and that we can bring business here versus another place. We can be this discriminating reason why the economic development is happening here versus another place. Again, we're not there yet, but that to me, it becomes sort of the full opportunity of EST to go from what most people would think is, getting people out of work into work, but really becoming an attractive economic development engine for businesses that are looking for places to locate or relocate, and picking a place because they know there's going to be a ready workforce there.
That's really interesting. So do you think that in particular is enough to drive businesses to choose Ontario?
I do.
Yeah.
I do, in part. We are doing some work with some local economic development arms of government, and we're having that conversation. There's two things that they're looking for. One is the workforce. Two, they're looking for the level of diversity that we find in our inclusion groups already. In other words, we're already serving that group, and we can provide that sort of support to that particular group, so that an employer who's looking to come in, we can tell that story in advance and say, hey, look, we've got this ready. So I do think that overall we'll be able to do it. What's going to make the difference, though, is our continued increase in serving people year over year.
Right.
We've done a really good job. If you take out year one, which is only 3 months, the first year of COVID, I think we had about 13,000 and some EAPs. The next year was 14,000. This last year was just under 19.
Right.
And we're on track to do over 20. Now, our government commitment was 28,000.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel that we're all a little bit at risk until we hit that number.
Right.
Because the what we will realize when we hit that number are numbers that impact local economies.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I care about the volume so much.
Yeah.
And to the extent that that volume is full of individuals who are from social assistance, it's an even better story.
Yeah. So do you think then the type of program that you were talking about where they're maybe focused on education as opposed to getting job entries, might that be useful if we kind of recognize, okay, there's a lot of employers in, say, US and Canada that are looking for machine operators. That sort of program would be useful to kind of implement in Ontario in hopes of drawing those businesses in and everything?
100%. 100%. We need to do more of that. Probably have the raw data in the POI. What are people thinking are their top 3 job choices? With one caveat. The one thing the POI can't do is explain to somebody, well, here are some of your other options that you've never thought about. Right. You never thought about being a machinist. You never thought about doing solar. You never thought about this stuff. So how and when in the process can we introduce them to other occupations that might not be squarely within their choice?
Right.
We need to do a better job of that. It's more than just labor market information, but it is this opportunity for them to be acclimated to or understand, as you said earlier, well, what goes into that? What do you need to know to be able to do it? In my mind, I'm thinking these are very short trainings from a few days to maybe about a dozen or so weeks. Right. Very short, but quite frankly, the employer community will be leading us in terms of what they think is the right length, because they're the ones who are going to need to bring those people in.
Yeah.
So we would want to work with employers to understand their needs that way and then go back and build those pathways so that we can get more and more people into it. But again, on the front end, we've got to get folks to understand that those are some opportunities that really exist.
Yeah.
I didn't know, for example, excavator, the backhoe.
Yeah, heavy machine operators,
Yeah. I didn't know they made that much money.
Oh yeah.
I had no idea. And
that was a secondary trade for the program that I used to run.
Oh, really?
So, yeah.
Yeah. So who would know if you didn't grow up around that?
Yeah.
Right?
No,
you just wouldn't have any idea. But it actually pays well, and you can do it with some training.
Yep. Absolutely. So talking about workforce, I have a quick question about this. I'm curious if you know how our workforce might evolve over the next decade or so with the introduction of AI. Really curious about this. I'm putting you on the spot here. It wasn't a question you prepared for.
So let me just a couple thoughts right away. One, I can see the utility of AI in sort of the interview preparation process. I think right now a lot of it's around resumes and keywords and all that, which is okay. That's not, for me, the utility of gathering information from interviewing and having AI models do it and give you feedback, I think is huge. I think that's a great opportunity to do that. Yeah. The second place where I think it would be useful is, there might be some profiles of individuals who we all work with across different companies within the network. and different interventions were entered into for a number of them, and then AI could study that,
Right.
and provide some analysis around what might be a prototype pattern that you could expect to happen if in fact you put this person in this activity before you put them in this activity.
Right.
I don't think it can replace a human. This is just me talking.
Yep.
I don't think it can replace judgment and touch. And, if you know your craft very well, I wouldn't be concerned about it.
Yeah.
But it might be able to give you some level of analysis that you could do on your own, but it would be able to do it much faster. Plus, it can do it across places that you're not, and pull in all that information. So I think there's some great uses for AI. I like I said, I wouldn't be concerned if I was anybody in the network. It's not going to replace you.
No. Yeah.
It's not refined enough to do that.
No.
Yet.
Yet.
I don't know if it will
I don't
be.
know if
I've been toying with it a little bit. And I understand it's how smartly you ask the question.
Right.
And I think that all of us need to improve our smart question asking.
Yeah.
So we're not there.
Yeah.
It's going to be a while before we get there.
Yeah, for sure. That's great. So I think this is a good place to kind of wrap up a little here. But before I do, I want to give you a chance to kind of address the network. Is there anything that you want to say to the service provider network now?
Yes. I try to say it every day. I mean it sincerely when I say thank you. We had a particular vision for how we wanted to operate as the service system manager. I have to thank all of you for your commitment and willingness to let us lead in the way that we thought we would, which is in full support of you, particularly those of you who see people every day who come in for your services. You are the most important part of what we have set out to do, and you have far exceeded our expectations. There's a lot more that we can do and that we will do in support of you. We will continue to evolve. We will continue to innovate. But I am very pleased with everything that has happened up to now, and I look forward to more greatness coming from the front line.
That's wonderful. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming in today, and we'll see you all next time.
Thank you. Thank you very much.